So we're going to work on, we're going to learn about APIs. We're going to learn about APIs. So what are APIs? APIs are just what? Application Programming Interface. So they basically serve as a intermediary between 2 points or two applications. So let's say I want to communicate with external service. Let's say communicate with YouTube. Then I'm going to use an API to fetch data from YouTube. Let's say I want to communicate with the Amazon Web Service. Then I can use an API to fetch data from the Amazon service. Let's say I want to communicate with GitHub service. I can use the API to fetch data from GitHub. So the API is just like uh, something that stands between two applications or two services that allows you to communicate between 2 points. Okay. So in this, you're going to be working with the GitHub API. You're going to do, I'm going to implement application that fetches user activity from GitHub. So here, if you enter, let's see your username, mine is SYAT007. This application is going to fetch the user data associated with this username. So to begin with, let's create our files and folders. Okay, so I want to structure this well. So let me put all my necessary files here. Them here. Put them here. Okay, so I'm going to have an API module or file. This is where I implement the API logic. And another file here. And okay, I think that's two. Then let me add one more file, the entry point file. Let me call it index.js for simplicity. Okay, so this is where the application is going to start. And okay, so to make this a CLI or command line interface application, I have to make this index.js executable. Do that. I'll open this folder where I'm working in the terminal. So this is the terminal. This is the terminal. So let me open that folder or directory. Minutes in directory. Yeah. Where is it? I think it's desktop. Okay. So after going to that directory, then here you have to type in npm it's -y. So this will create a package.json file. We're going to use this to make the file executable simply. So you type in bin and type in the name that I want your command to execute the file. I want the command GitHub activity. Then the path the file I want to execute. The path here is just index.js. Since the package.json and the index.js are in the same directory, the relative direction from the package.json to the index.js is just this. Okay, so we save this. Then okay, so now the terminal you type in npm to make the file unexecutable. So before that, let's type in the shebang. So this shebang is basically going to be responsible for making the file unexecutable. Okay, there's exclamation user bin code. Okay. And there's an error. Okay, let me forget the comma. Yeah, so we have this. Okay, so now let's implement our API logic. I want to make this into a function, right? That we are going to export. Okay, so let me create this function. It's going to be an asynchronous function since you are working with asynchronous JavaScript. Okay, so let me call this get user activity. Get user activity. We need to take an argument a username. Okay. So first, what is the API endpoint? How are you going to communicate with the GitHub API? So use what you call an endpoint. So this is the endpoint is basically just a URL string. So we create a URL string. And then we paste in the full string. Okay, so this is the string, the URL string, which serves as the API endpoint. So here, this is where the argument comes into play. So this is going to insert in the argument that will be passing in the terminal, like s ert 007. So this username going to be entered into here. Then the URL is going to be passed forward. Okay, so now let's use the fetch API. We are going to use an API to call an API, which is very interesting. So since this is an asynchronous application, which means that it can fail, so I want to use a try catch block, catch any error. Okay, so we'll try to what? Try to fetch. So this fetch API is a function. This function is just going to take in the URL and options object. And this option object is going to take in the headers that, so when you're working with APIs from, let's say, external services, you have to work with the requirements. So if you want to request user activity from GitHub into this API, you have to make sure that every request has this headers object. Okay, so this headers object, you have to have in this this statement here, this key value pair user agent node.js is crucial, important. Without it, it's not going to work. Okay, you also have to have this key value pair here, and finally have this key value pair here. This is from the GitHub documentary, so you can go to GitHub and see this there for yourself. Okay. So this fetch URL returns a response. This returns a response. Okay. The reason why we are using await here is because this is asynchronous, and we want to await for this fetch to finish before we move on to the next line. Okay. So what if the response doesn't come through? Okay, so if the response is not okay, if the response fails to come through, I want to throw an error. Throw new error. Throw new error with the error message. Okay, message failed. Gonna put in any error message you want. Not really important. Adding the status, response the status. You can see the type of error that we encountered. Okay, so if this response fails, it means that you're going to throw this error. This catch block will catch the error here. Okay, so I'm going to console.log this error here. Let me do console.error. So the error, let me type in the message failed to retrieve data. Okay, so this, let me make this more visible. Can I mouse? Yeah. I hope you can see everything. Okay, so if it fails, catch the error. No, if it fails, throw the error, catch the error here, then we are good to go. So what if you succeed? So if it is a success here, then want to return a data. Okay, so this returns a JSON. What's a JSON? JSON is a JavaScript stringified object. So what we want to do is that we want to save the data, use the await again. So this is an asynchronous operation. JSON. Okay, so this is a JSON file or JSON object. Okay, so after you have this JSON data here, what should you do with it? So this should be an array. We are expecting an array. If it has nothing, if there's no data in it, then there is an issue somewhere. So basically, if we want to make sure to check if it's an array, so array, data type array is array, passing the data. So use the exclamation to negate the response of this. And or what if it's an array bar? It contains nothing. Check the length. The length is 0. What does that mean? It means that it has nothing. Contains nothing. So let me just console.log that. Yeah. Has nothing is there. So if there really is data, return that data. Okay. So that should be fine. So let me export the function get user data, user activity run. Okay. This is the API implementation. So you're done with the API implementation. Now you have to use the API implementation, okay, which is really simple. You're going to grab the argument from the command line. They then pass that argument to the API, and that API will send the request to the API endpoint. Okay, so let me do that here. So let me import the API implementation that I did here. Okay, and then let me implement the function to call the API. So I'm going to grab the arguments from the command line using the process function or process object. So use the this is an object. Sorry, autocomplete is messing this up. Okay, so this is an object. This here is an object. I'm going to slice it to grab the I can't I suppose slice. I'm going to slice it to grab the third item in this array. Did I say this is an object? I mean it's an array rather. Grab the third item, which is index 2. Okay. So if the user doesn't pass anything, and the length is 0, to tell you that hey, pass something. Okay, pass something, pass a username for me. Okay, yes. Okay, then exit the process. But cease the running. This autocomplete cease everything. Cease, stop. Cease everything, stop. Okay, now if the user does pass the username, let's grab it, grab the username, grab it from this args. Is the first item in the array. Okay, I want to see if it is working, so let me do something like this. Fetching activity dot. Okay. That should be fine. Okay, so now I'm going to use this username and then call the get user activity function with the arguments using the username. Okay, so this get user activity with the argument username is going to bring in an array for which I'm going to loop over it. Okay, using the for off loop. So for every element in the array, I'm going to console log element. Okay, so now let me also export the run CLL now into my main entry point for this application. So I'm just going to import the run CLL and I'm going to run it, see what's going to happen. Before that, let me make changes here. Change the type to model. The default is the CommonJS, but I'm using ESS syntax here, so I have to change the type to module, which stands for ESS module. Okay, so now let me call the command GitHub activity as in my username. I'm going to paste it here. Paste. Then click enter. Wish me luck. Error fetching user activity. Okay, so we are saying that 404 not found. Okay, so I passed in a wrong username. It's supposed to be this rather. Yes, so as you can see, it is working simply and perfectly. So this is the user activity for this username. Everything starts in here is the user activity. So once again, let's go through the logic here. So when I type in GitHub activity and then pass in this username in the command line, I'm going to execute the index.js. Now, how does it know to execute the index.js? Because of this here, the bin and this command. See here, it is index.js. So it knows that when I call this command, execute index.js. Okay, so now it executes index.js using the node environment. That's why there's a node environment here. Okay, so doing this execution, it imports the run CLL function from here and it runs it. So now it is running the run CLL function. Where the run CLL function, it is from here. Then it goes here, then it runs this function, this run CLL function. Now it grabs the SCRT007 from here. You save this into this array here, which just contains one item, which is the SCRT007. And then save that string here, the first item of the array, which is the SCRT007, into this variable here. Okay, then it passes this variable into the get user activity function here. Okay, so now I'm going to run this function. Now, where is this function at? This function is here. It's going to run this function. So now I'm going to pass in this function here. So the execution starts from here. The SCRT007 is going to be put into this string here. And this string receive this variable here. Then this fetch API will call the fetch API will call the fetch function, which uses this URL here. Okay, using this headers. Then it brings in a response here. If the response has a response, if it is valid, it saves the data following this JSON, which changes the data into a what? Into an object. Okay. Anyways, this brings us to the end of the implementation of what I set out to do. We have a clear understanding of the API, how it works, and an example implementation. Okay. Good day to you all. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.